Welcome to Saga Thing, where we're putting the sagas of the Icelanders on trial. I'm John.
And I'm Andy. Each week we choose a saga each week. Hold on, we gotta fix that.
Well, you always say each week. It's not actually true.
No, not
each
true
episode,
at all.
Perhaps?
Yeah. In each episode, we choose a saga, discuss its plot and themes, and then judge the story and its characters at the Saga Thing. Welcome back, John.
Thanks, you too. And a Happy New Year to our listeners. Here we are in 2014.
Yeah, so what did you do with your holidays there, John?
Well, I did some grading, did some lesson planning, and had a kid.
Oh, really? Well, congratulations. Yep. I had
Thank
no
you very
idea.
Much. Very unconvincing.
How is everybody?
Everybody's doing great. This is my second son, John Leopold. So he's doing great. He's fat and happy, just the way we like a baby to be.
Awesome.
So we're happy.
Well, if anybody hears any crying in the background while we're recording these things, you'll know that it's little John, and you can excuse him.
Or it's possibly just Andy, sort of taking a moment off mic.
Well, what better way to kick off our new year of Saga Thing than with the Saga Hen-Thorir saga?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Yeah, neither am I, actually. Let's just jump into the intro, shall we?
Go for it.
Now, this week represents a bit of a departure for us in that we're kind of talking for the first time about a saga that neither of us has ever taught or written about. In all honesty, John, I've never even read this one before you recommended it for the podcast.
Really?
No. Although I should say that I was excited about reading a saga about a man whose nickname involves farmyard poultry.
Well, that's certainly understandable. Now, I guess this sort of thing is going to happen more regularly as we move forward.
Yeah, but that's part of why we wanted to do this podcast in the first place. It's an opportunity to read sagas that we weren't familiar with, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, it means that we're occasionally surprised by events as we encounter them for the first time in the saga. While I've read this one, I hadn't so much as glanced at it in years. And I'd forgotten a lot of the character stuff that we're given.
Yeah, in short, I think we're both pretty happy with this one, aren't we?
Yeah, I think so.
Do you mind if I start with a quick observation, though?
Can I stop you?
Highly unlikely.
Well, feel free then.
All right, so when I first picked up this saga, I thought that I would like Hen-Thorir a lot.
You mean like the actual guy, the actual person?
Yeah, that's what I mean. The saga's named after him, Hen-Thorir. So I figured he must be the protagonist, and the funny nickname Hen kind of intrigued me.
You're easily pleased. How do you feel about him now?
I hate the guy. I can't stand him.
Well, I mean, to be fair, the saga introduces him with the disclaimer that nobody likes him.
I know, but the saga's named after him. So even then, I thought we'd sympathize with him or find some reason to excuse his reputation.
Did you learn nothing from Eric the Red's saga?
No, I was under the impression that the saga author would redeem the guy at some point and we'd be cheering for him by the end. His name's Hen-Thorir. Hen!
That never really happens, does it?
No, never. He's deplorable. Probably one of the most unlikable characters in all the sagas that I've read. And I'm glad he gets his head cut off.
Do you feel better now?
Yeah, I feel better. Well, I just thought I'd lay my cards out on the table right away. Okay. We can start now. Where do we begin, John?
Well, we usually start with the word count.
Right. This is another short one, which is part of why we picked it, right?
Well, I mean, let's not give out all of our trade secrets, but yes. Hen-Thorir's saga measures up almost exactly with our Hrafnkel benchmark. It's 8,910 words long, or 0.976 of a Hrafnkel saga.
It's still a ridiculous measurement, but anyway, it's really close.
It is.
So it's important to say at the outset, before we start this thing off, that that's pretty much where the similarities end between Hrafnkel and Hen-Thorir saga.
Mm-hmm.
For starters, the number of named figures in this saga is exponentially higher than the barely 24 in Hrafnkel.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the cast includes some of the great names from saga literature and supporting roles. I would say in some ways, Hen-Thorir's saga is as important for the way it ties together stories from other sagas as it is for its insights into law and culture in Iceland.
Very well put.
Oh, well, thank you.
It's certainly important for understanding some of the dynamics at play in the sagas of the Borgafjord region.
Yeah, definitely.
I actually look forward to digging into Ale Saga and Laxdala Saga again, since they both feature so many of the major players in this saga.
And the author of Hen-Thorir's saga wastes no time in introducing us to all of them.
Yeah, sadly, no, he does not. He hits us with all of them at once, doesn't he, right in the first chapter?
Yeah, the saga begins by laying out several family groups right away. The names and connections can be a little overwhelming, even for people familiar with saga writers' penchant for genealogical prefaces.
It's certainly not uncommon for writers to provide 2 or 3 families at the outset of the story, but this one gives us 6 distinct units, each of which provides the background for one of the major players in the saga, and it's rapid-fire stuff and very exhausting.
Yeah, I mean, by my count, the writer identifies 32 people by name in the first 6 paragraphs,
Right.
Along with a dozen or so place names. Like a lot of sagas, the preface uses family trees to add weight to the saga by showing its links to other famous figures of the age.
Right. But for our purposes, I think we're going to skip that list and get right into the action.
Well, let's not be too hasty. I mean, don't you think everyone wants to learn about Tunguad and Blundkettel? At the outset, we have these 2 prominent men named Tunguad and Blundkettel. Each of them goes on...
No. Let's move on. I'm going to sum it up like this. Folks, if you haven't read Hen-Thorir Saga yet, but you plan to, don't get discouraged by the opening.
Aww.
Things get moving really quickly once Hen-Thorir shows up, and we'll leave it at that.
Okay, well that's true.
Okay, so let's start with Hen-Thorir himself.
Fine. Hen-Thorir turns out to be a rather unscrupulous businessman who doesn't mind driving a hard bargain, even at the expense of his customers. How's that?
Yeah, that's pretty good. He's so bad that the Better Business Bureau's probably got a big file on this guy.
I don't think they have a Better Business Bureau in 10th century Borgafjord.
I know that.
Well, but they do have a highly developed code of honor and reputation, which I suppose could stand in for the Better Business Bureau in this case.
Yeah, that's a fine point.
Well, regardless of his poor reputation, after all of his buying and selling, he ends up a very wealthy man with a large farm at Votten, just above Norðutunga.
Now, Hen-Thorir's early success doesn't stop him from wheeling and dealing, though. Once he's settled at Votten, he starts acting as kind of a money lender, and before too long, everyone in the district seems to owe him money. And the first chapter concludes with a pretty definitive statement about the state of his popularity. It says, "There was scarcely a man more detested than was Hen-Thorir."
So, were you still feeling bad for him at this point? Were you still trying to find a way to like him?
Honestly, yeah, I was. I had hopes that he was going to be redeemed, I said.
How long did it take you to give up on that?
Not long at all. I think I started to dislike him right away in Chapter 2 when he forces his way into Arngrim's family group. You really start to get a sense of his curmudgeonly character then.
He's not very tactful, is he?
No.
Okay, well, so let's set the stage a little bit.
Okay. So Hen-Thorir's been lending out a lot of money and people aren't paying him back as quickly as he'd like. And rather than naturally developing relationships with these people and earning their trust, he decides to visit the local chieftain named Arngrim the Gothi and buy a relationship.
Yeah, and he doesn't do it, tactfully at all. He sort of strolls in and says, "So, I'm taking your son Helgi home with me, as a foster child. Not kidnapping him, but
Right.
As a foster child. And you'll pay me back by supporting me in my claims against debtors."
Yeah, it's pretty blunt, and Arngrim isn't really impressed since he immediately refuses. But then Hen-Thorir offers to give Helgi half of his now immense wealth if Arngrim agrees to the fostering arrangement.
Which, of course, he has to agree to. He says something like, "I think it's a proven fact that one doesn't turn down a good offer."
Yeah, not a smart move, though.
Well, the way I see it, Arngrim is kind of a small player in the region. He's a Gothi, but he's not the most powerful man around by any stretch.
Exactly.
Hen-Thorir is not a chieftain, but he's a very wealthy guy. And Arngrim is either aware of the benefits of having a guy like with Hen-Thorir's wealth under his wing, or he's a little bit worried about his own finances and sees this as a way to help himself.
Yeah, or it's probably both at the same time, right? It works well for Hen-Thorir, too, since he now has the support of a local chieftain in his legal cases, which he has a lot of, since he's a moneylender and a rather difficult person to deal with.
Yeah. Now, the saga shifts over to one of the other major figures in the area, a more powerful chieftain named Tunguad. We're introduced to him when he tries to assert his right to set prices in the region on imports by imposing an embargo on a newly arrived ship belonging to a man named Orn the Norwegian. Orn doesn't want Odd to set the price for his goods.
Yeah, and I think we have to read this as evidence of Tunguad's arrogance, which is important to the saga writer. It's an early indicator that he's at least thinking in part of a critique of late Icelandic Storgothar, those super chieftains who tore Iceland apart in the 13th century.
Sure, yes, but as we'll see in other sagas, Tunguad is notable for his arrogance in general.
True, but this saga author immediately introduces Blundkettel, another local chieftain who was described in the genealogies of Chapter 1 as one of the wealthiest men and the best man in the time of old religion. Now, if Tunguad is the representative of the greedy, self-serving chieftains of the 13th century, then Blundkettel is this figure of a kind-hearted, compassionate, and thoughtful chieftain.
Were there any of those in the 13th century?
I honestly don't know. We tend to hear more about the bad ones, don't we? But I prefer to think of him as a figure of what the saga author and his audience hope to see in their chieftains.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Whereas Tunguod bullies Orn, Blundkettel welcomes him into his home and offers him protection without a thought for compensation. I mean, although, to be fair, he does say that he knew Orn's father, and so he's acting out of a sense of duty for the son of an old friend.
Yeah, but even that is a point in Blundkettel's favor, I think. He's selflessly putting himself at risk by getting involved in this dispute, and to be fair, it's not like he's lifelong friends with Orn's father. They spent some time together as children, and that's it. Blundkettel's going above and beyond the call of duty here.
I mean, of course, you're putting a very positive spin on it. It's also a good opportunity for him to assert his own authority by disregarding Tunguod's ruling. But whatever its meaning, he and his son Herstein take Orn the Norwegian, his crew, and their cargo into their protection. We're told that Odd learns about Blundkettel's betrayal, but he wisely notes that Kettle is both well-liked and ambitious, and he decides to let things stand for now.
Though you get the sense that he's not going to forget this slight, is he?
Oh no. If saga characters are known for one thing, it's a long memory for insults.
Yeah. Now, the saga author is going to stick with Blundkettel for just a little bit longer, and I'm thankful that they do, because he turns out to be a really cool guy. There's a bad hay crop that fall, and as winter comes on, people are getting nervous about not having enough fodder for their livestock. Blundkettel, being a smart chieftain, imposes a strict quota on keeping and slaughtering livestock on his tenants' farmsteads in order to avoid a shortage. But several tenants try to defy him, and they run into trouble once things get going in the winter.
There's always a few bad apples.
Yeah. Well, at first, Blundkettel is generous to a fault, and he even slaughters 40 of his own horses to free up some fodder for his worst-hit tenants. But then he tells these tenants to keep this act of generosity quiet, not so much out of humility, I think, but more out of the fear that more tenants are going to come sucking at his teat.
Oh, it's an unfortunate choice of words.
I'm sorry. You know that happens to me sometimes.
Yeah. I just want to point out, though, I mean, that's really a remarkable, I mean, it must be understood to be a remarkable act of generosity. I mean, to slaughter one horse is quite a loss for a farmstead to take. But to slaughter 40 horses, he's destroying an entire herd.
Oh, yeah. It's basically a third of his herd. This is it's rough math, but he's got 140 horses. He says drive them home and kill 40 of them, and then let's give the feed to these people that those horses were going to have. It's a remarkable act.
Right. I mean, as you say, he has to be understood here to be generous, sort of beyond the bounds of common expectation.
Absolutely. Anyways, the two tenants can't keep that quiet for very long at all. They tell everybody what a great man Blundkettel is. And near the end of winter, 2 more tenants show up, but Kettle's got nothing left to spare at this point. It's well known that Hen-Thorir, though, does have plenty of hay, but the tenants are convinced that he's not going to sell to them without Blundkettel's help.
Well, and of course they're right. I mean, he won't sell to them even with Blundkettel's help.
Yeah, this is just another example of Hen-Thorir's cruelty. Blundkettel starts off by asking a fair price, but is soon offering huge amounts of money, expensive gifts, whatever else that Thorir might want.
Right, and of course each offer increases the amount of money and therefore honor transferred to Thorir should he accept.
Right, but he doesn't, of course. He's got no interest in honor. All Hen-Thorir cares about is money. And finally, after trying to reason with this guy, Blundkettel decides to just take the hay without permission. But he leaves ample compensation for it. That's a really important point. He takes the hay, but he gives a lot of money for it.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that scene. I mean, the laws surrounding hay usage were actually fairly controversial in Iceland. And there are some scholars who believe this entire saga exists really just as a pretext for discussing hay law.
Hay law? Really?
Yes.
John, we've got a couple dozen killings and a marriage to get through. But sure, if you want, let's talk about hay laws.
Don't underestimate the importance of fodder regulations to a well-ordered society.
No, you wouldn't.
I would not dare. In this case, what people are seeing is evidence of Iceland chafing under Norwegian rule after the 1262 capitulation of the island to Norway.
Ah, so this is one of those laws.
Yeah. The hay laws were introduced by Magnus VI, who was king from 1263 to 1280, right around the time Hen-Thorir's saga was written. The law was enacted in response to a series of bad crop years in Iceland, and it required that farmers sell their hay to neighbors if they were in need of it, or pay a fine if they refused to sell. So essentially, anyone who didn't want to sell their surplus hay to a neighbor had to pay a luxury tax on it.
That sounds fair enough, I think.
Well, Magnus thought so. The problem was the automatic response to centralized authority in Iceland. Right? People who might have been quite willing to share their hay with a neighbor would refuse to do so on principle because no Norwegian king was going to tell them what to do.
Yeah, well, I can see that, but I think the saga makes it pretty clear that Hen-Thorir is a big jerk for refusing to sell his hay to Blundkettel, right?
Well, right, but of course the saga author is not necessarily neutral in this. If the hay law scholars are right, what we're looking at here is a saga writer adding pro-Norwegian propaganda to his writing, possibly in order to attract Norwegian patronage, and possibly just in support of these unpopular laws.
I guess that makes some sense. This is around the time that the Norwegian kings are openly hiring Icelandic writers to produce biography sagas of their families.
That's true. In fact, King Hakon commissioned a biography of his own, Hakon being Magnus's father. The biography was written by Sturla Thordarson, nephew of the infamous Snorri Sturluson.
Good old Snorri Sturluson. We haven't mentioned him in a while, have we?
Yeah, no, we haven't. The saga that was commissioned only survives in a fragment, but we know it was called the Saga of Magnus Lawmender. So the whole law code thing was apparently very important to Magnus and his father.
Yeah, it's not a very subtle title, is it?
No.
Yeah. Well, anyway, legal precedent aside, Hen-Thorir deeply resents Blundkettel's theft, as he calls it, of the hay, and so he sets his sight on revenge right away.
Sure. Which brings us, of course, to the central agitating force in this saga, which is Hen-Thorir's desire to stir up trouble for what he thinks of as his enemies.
Yeah. In essence, Hen-Thorir rides around to his neighbors and announces that he's been robbed by Blundkettel. He rides to Arngrim-Godi, the father of his foster son Helgi, and then to Tungu-Ad, both chieftains who have reason to want to take Blundkettel down a peg.
And he does it in such a pathetic, sniveling way, too.
That is his way, isn't it?
Yes, sadly it is.
But in both cases, he's misjudged his superiors, and they're smart enough to ask Hen-Thorir's foster son Helgi what really happened. And Helgi explains that the story had been exaggerated and that Blundkettel had acted quite fairly. Now, for obvious reasons, neither man is willing to side with Hen-Thorir, and he's got to go home angry.
Well, I mean, you'd think Hen-Thorir would just leave Helgi at home if he can't trust him to keep his mouth shut. I mean, I'm not on Hen-Thorir's side or anything, but that just seems like obvious tactics.
Yeah, it's probably fair to say that Hen-Thorir is not remarkable for his intelligence. He does have better luck, though, when he finds Tungu-Ad's son Thorvald at Arngrim's house, and he really plays up to him, puts on a good act.
Yeah, Thorvald's an interesting figure. He's sort of the classic restless chieftain's son. Mm-hmm. He's eager to make a name for himself, and Hen-Thorir spots him as being just the kind of man who's likely to fall for Hen-Thorir's trumped-up charges against Blundkettel.
Okay, but at the same time, I think the Saga's audience would see the merit in Hen-Thorir's case. He's a jerk, yes, right? But he's been forced by a social superior into surrendering his goods. And that just doesn't jibe well with medieval Iceland social ideals, even after the start of the Norwegian rule. Now, I should add that I'm not defending Hen-Thorir here. I hate the guy. I'm just playing a bit of devil's advocate.
It's funny that we're both spending a lot of time explaining that we're not defending Hen-Thorir for anything.
No, it speaks to how unlikable he is.
He's truly an awful person.
And you know what's interesting about how awful he is, you know, whereas other saga characters do horrible things in terms of maiming and killing and pillaging, we're willing to accept that to some extent.
Well, they do it with style.
Yeah.
Hen-Thorir has no style.
Yeah, so I guess that speaks to our horrible values, doesn't it? He's a bit stingy.
Yes. We may be looking at kind of both issues, right? Legitimate outrage, but also coupled with Thorvald's desire to prove himself to be a man of consequence.
Or Thorvald's desire to get some money, I think, is what really comes into it.
Well, fair enough.
Yeah.
But it works. I mean, Thorvald is sort of recruited to help Hen-Thorir, and then convinces Arngrim to come along, and they gather a group of men to ride with Hen-Thorir to Blundkettel's house.
And it's worth noting that when the parties meet in the field, Hen-Thorir, typically, shows up with only 2 men. His brother Varfari and his foster son Helgi, who probably wishes he'd stayed at home.
And when Thorvald asks Hen-Thorir why he's brought so few men, doesn't he say something like, "Well, I knew you'd have enough guys, so..."
Yeah, he's such a tool.
When Hen-Thorir's group arrives, Blundkettel behaves reasonably and calmly toward them, and is openly friendly to Thorvald.
Yeah.
But Thorvald's determined to show off, and he insultingly announces a lawsuit against Blundkettel on Hen-Thorir's behalf. Blundkettel's sort of angry about Thorvald's behavior, but he controls himself and walks back into his house without blowing up.
But Blundkettel's not alone at the house. Orn the Norwegian, if you remember, is still staying with Blundkettel, and there's no love lost between him and Thorvald's father, Tungu Odd. Now, Orn picks up his bow and fires an arrow at Thorvald's group. Just as they're getting ready to leave, he kind of shoots randomly. He's not aiming for anyone in particular.
Yeah.
And the arrow hits Hen-Thorir's foster son and Arngrim's actual son, Helgi, fatally wounding him.
Now, this is the first death scene in the saga. It's actually quite a ways in for the first death.
Yeah.
But it's a doozy. I mean, Hen-Thorir immediately shoos everybody else away. He won't let anyone near Helgi, who's already dead on the ground. But he then claims that Helgi died in his arms, and that Helgi's dying words were a poem. Brenni, brenni, Blundkettel inni. Burn, burn, Blundkettel inside. Everyone assumes that Hen-Thorir is making it up, because they know Hen-Thorir.
Yeah.
But Arngrim, Helgi's father, doesn't really have any choice but to act on those words.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of Hen-Thorir's words versus the dead guy, and I think Hen-Thorir will win the argument. So yeah, they've got to act. And of course, we've still got Thorvald around to back any stupid idea that Hen-Thorir comes up with, because John, did we mention that Hen-Thorir promises us half of his wealth?
No, I don't think we had, he's, not quite bribing Thorvald into helping him, but it doesn't come far from that.
Yeah. Well, I can't believe we missed that.
You really take every opportunity you can to knock Hen-Thorir, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Because he deserves it. And I think the saga author wants me to. I'm just doing my job.
Well, you're quite right in this case. I mean, it is Thorvald who leads the attack on Blundkettel's farm that night at Hen-Thorir's urging.
Yeah, and of course, by attack, you mean they set fire to the farmstead while everyone's sleeping inside.
Yeah, but they're not going to attack face to face.
And then they refuse to allow anyone inside to get out. And they stand around to make sure everyone in the house burns to death. Okay? So when Blundkettel, may that great man rest in peace, asks if there's any way to make an agreement, Thorir stands out there and says, there's no choice but to burn.
Look, I'm agreeing with you. These are not nice men.
Look, I'm just making the point that the saga author's making. The narrative is as spare as ever, but it's clear we're meant to be revolted by the action of the burners, and especially Hen-Thorir.
There are actually a lot of fairly repugnant people in this saga, and they're all kind of looking for a way to take advantage of the situation. When Blundkettel's son Herstein, who actually wasn't at home during the attack, asks for help from Tungu Odd the next morning, Tungu Odd seizes the opportunity to claim Blundkettel's land for himself on the ground that there isn't a habitable dwelling there. And so on a legal technicality, it's not currently owned.
Yeah, that's very sleazy, too. Here you are. Your father and the rest of your family and friends have just been burned alive.
Well, their bodies are still smoldering, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So imagine you're standing there with the powerful chieftain Tungu Odd, who you've asked to help you. And the guy bends down, picks up a firebrand, and claims the property for himself since, as he puts it, there's no habitable dwelling there.
Well, the dwellings are still smoldering, too.
And then he hops on his tiny horse and rides off over the hill back to his farm. What the hell's going on here?
Well, fortune favors the bold, I suppose.
Yeah, the only silver lining for Herstein is that he's got his friend Thorbjorn, and Thorbjorn notices that Orn the Norwegian's cargo seems to have miraculously survived in an outbuilding.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, Orn was in the house with Blundkettel when it burned, so I guess he wasn't going to be needing his stuff anymore.
It's very unfortunate, but it's nice that something worked out for Herstein. And with Thorbjorn's help, he salvages the goods and the livestock from the property.
Right, and Herstein's still determined to build support and get revenge on the burners for the death of his father. So he contrives a complicated plan with his foster father Thorbjorn to enlist some of the biggest names around for his cause. First, they trick Thorkel Scarf into supporting them. Then, Thorkel helps them trick Gunnar Hlifrson into helping them in exchange for Herstein marrying Gunnar's daughter Thurid.
Yeah, that one's pretty clever. They wake Gunnar up in the middle of the night, and they make him come outside, and they won't let him get in out of the cold until he agrees to the marriage.
Yeah, I like that one.
Is that,
I think at one point they're actually...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but is that true that they're outside?
Yeah, Gunnar, that's the whole thing with, I'm gonna hit your face with my sword if you don't get your master out here.
I think they want him to come to the door so that they can talk to him. I think
they make him come outside and they close the door behind him.
Is that
right? And they stand on his cloak so that he can't get away.
I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, it's funny as hell. Yeah. Gunnar got up and went out to the yard, dressed in a shirt and light linen breeches, a cloak wrapped around him, black shoes on his feet, sword in his hand. And as soon as he goes,
told him that they were several altogether. Gunnar went further out into the hayfield, grabbed the door ring, and slammed the door shut behind him. Ah, interesting. Okay,
so read that as they pull the door shut so he can't get back inside. Then they go around to the back of the house, and they sat on so close on each side of him they were sitting on the cloak Gunnar had wrapped around himself. So he can't get up without losing his cloak, and they've locked the door.
Brilliant.
It's freaking
well
hilarious.
Played, Thorkel. Well played.
So Gunnar is now sort of part of their crew, and he then helps them by tricking his brother-in-law Thord Bellower into committing himself to the support of the new married couple. And, of course, by extension, to Herstein's plans for revenge, since the marriage makes Herstein a kinsman of Thord's.
Exactly. Herstein ends up with quite a crew of supporters. Thord Bellower alone is a significant figure to have on your side. And combined with Gunnar, Thorkel, and Thorbjorn, Herstein's got most of the big men in the region in his corner.
Right, and the opposing force, Hen-Thorir, Arngrim-Gothi, Tungu-Aud, and Aud's son Thorvald, is nearly as impressive, but they're less unified.
Yeah, they're very individualistic characters, aren't they?
Which, of course, in some ways, as you've said, is, that's that sort of classic Icelandic attitude.
Exactly.
When Herstein's crew summons Arngrim and Hen-Thorir to the Thingness thing for the burning, their enemies scramble into action, but they don't seem to coordinate their plans at all.
Yeah, what follows is like a powder keg burning its fuse. The entire region is now up in arms, and all the main figures are racing around, trying to get their friends armed and ready.
All except one. Hen-Thorir, in the middle of all this, takes 11 friends and flees the district, and no one's sure where he's gone.
Typical. Things get a little bit heated in the neighborhood because of him, and now he's off hiding somewhere. He's despicable.
Patience.
Yeah, well, while Hen-Thorir is busy hiding from his enemies, hostilities get underway even before the assembly at Thingness. Herstein's crowd, which numbers 200 men with all their followers, runs into Tungu-Aud and 400 men on their way to Thingness. There's a pitched battle, and 5 men are killed, 1 of Tungu-Aud's and 4 of Thord Bellower's. And there are lots of injuries on both sides.
And, of course, since local hostilities are now running so high, the case is referred to the Althing. Herstein falls ill and he can't make the trip to the Althing, but the others go without him. Thord Bellower, though, plans his own attack. He waits outside the thing for Tungu-Aud and attacks him again when he arrives.
Now, we got to point out that things are just completely out of hand at this point.
Absolutely.
There are 600 men involved in the first battle between these two, and this time we're told that Aud has 300 men and Thord has a lot more than that. I mean, these are numbers that's hard to reconcile with the sparse population of the island.
I was thinking the same thing. I mean, are we dealing with poetic license here? Or is this a post-1262 author emphasizing the chaos caused by the powerful chieftains of the later Commonwealth era?
I think it's almost always that. And I think part of the message here too is an author who's pushing against that fierce independence, trying to say that it's not a reasonable way to go. Now, whether you want to see that as Norwegian propaganda or if you want to see that as Christian moralizing, I don't know, or just common sense. Damn it!
Although common sense, I think. To a degree, it's hard sometimes to differentiate between those two things. Remember that even the Christianization of Iceland came under Norwegian pressure.
Sure.
And so I'm not always sure that Christian moralizing and Norwegian interference were always understood to be distinct and different things in Iceland.
Well, perhaps, but we're talking about roughly 300 years later. And so I think the Christian moralizing can be quite possible in the 13th century since it's a thoroughly Christian country.
But so how does Christian moralizing result in overstating the number of people involved in the fighting?
Oh, it doesn't. I'm just talking about the be nice to your neighbors bit.
I see.
Anyways, Thord's strategy works. 6 of Odd's men are killed, and he's forced to retreat and set up his tents outside the usual campgrounds of the Althing. And when the case is heard, Arngrim the Gothi and most of the burners are sentenced to full outlawry, and Thorvald Oddsson is sentenced to only minor outlawry. But still, the bad guys get theirs.
Right. All except for Hen-Thorir. Hen-Thorir isn't outlawed. So what happens to him is that while the Althing is going on, Herstein, who was left behind due to a cold, is summoned by a farmer with a sick cow.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? That doesn't make any sense. What does Herstein know about sick cows?
Well, that's exactly what Herstein says. He quickly works out that the farmer is trying to lure him into a trap set by the missing Hen-Thorir.
Oh, so you tell me Hen-Thorir is finally going to do something?
Mm-hmm. Well, he's going to try. So Herstein calls his men and intentionally springs the ambush. Hen-Thorir and his men attack, but they're quickly outnumbered and killed.
Yay!
There you go. Herstein then rides to the Althing to announce Hen-Thorir's death and to be present for the outlawing of the others.
Wait, you missed the best part.
Oh, I was going to save that for the bloodshed.
Well, it's worth noting.
All right, go ahead. I'll give you the big moment since you've been waiting for it.
Thank you. I mean, I mentioned it earlier. It's not like I'm spoiling anything. Before Herstein goes to the Althing, he rides over to Hen-Thorir's body and lops the head off and carries it with him.
Mm-hmm. And it's stated very much as he just takes it as a souvenir. He never actually does anything with it.
Yeah,
we're sort of waiting for him to reveal it at the Althing, which is what happens to Grettir Asmundsson's head in Grettir's saga. But there's never a moment when the head is revealed. It's just, he just sort of rides off with it on his saddle, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, I think the saga author probably hated Hen-Thorir as much as I do. And so it's just like, what can we do to this guy? Let's take his head off.
Fair enough.
Anyway, there's one more loose end we need to tie up, and this is Tungu Odd's resentment of the alliance of his foes. Now, he plans to attack Gunnar Hlífarsson's farm in retaliation, but his second son Thorod, this is all where the genealogies and names get kind of complicated, but Odd's second son Thorod gets to the farm ahead of him. Turns out he's got a thing for Gunnar's daughter. Yeah. He makes Gunnar an offer that he can't refuse. If Gunnar agrees to Thorod marrying his younger daughter, Jolfrid, then the marriage alliance will stop Tungu Odd from attacking the farm.
And this is actually a fairly dramatic moment. Gunnar doesn't want Thorod for a son-in-law. He's already turned him down once before.
Exactly.
But Odd's band of men are literally on the horizon as Thorod makes this offer a second time, and Gunnar doesn't have much time to think it over.
It's a clear choice, and Gunnar makes it just in time. Tungu Odd arrives in Gunnar's yard, where he's confronted by his son, who tells him off for threatening his father-in-law-to-be. Imagine Tungu Odd's surprise.
Gunnar's daughters get married under weird circumstances, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And then there's one more to come. As the author tells us at the end of the saga, Thorod later disappears in Norway, and Jolfrid remarries to one of the sons of Egil Skallagrimsson.
Why haven't we covered Egil's saga yet?
Because there's so much to do before we get there. For starters, we've got the entire judgment section to go for Hen-Thorir. What happened? What's wrong?
Nothing. I just think it's funny. All right, let's get started.
Okay.
Best bloodshed.
All right, for best bloodshed, this saga doesn't actually have a whole lot to offer, which is sad to me because
but it's got a couple of great
sagas. But it's got a couple of good ones, a couple of obvious things. I'm going to start with the death of Helgi Arngrimsson, the foster son of Hen-Thorir. Helgi's that guy that kind of spoils many of Hen-Thorir's lies. But he takes an arrow from the bow of Orn and dies. And then in his while he's lying there dead, he's able to apparently recite poetry. It's quite nice.
Well, I think what's great about that one is that it's not so much the death as the way Hen-Thorir sort of manipulates that death. Right?
Yeah.
He starts creating a dying speech for this poor dead kid.
I wonder if anyone else had been shot, would the saga have played out the way that it did? Helgi's kind of just very, very well placed from the beginning right up to that moment to kind of bring everyone together.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course, everyone thinks of him as being the voice of reason. You know, they all turn to him whenever Hen-Thorir is spewing his lies.
Right.
They immediately turn to Helgi and say, so you were there, what happened?
Yeah. Well, you know, and certainly as a reader, he's probably, as far as that group of burners, he's the only one that we actually care about, because he's the only one so far that appears to be wholly good.
Mm-hmm. I like that choice.
So there you go. Death of Helgi.
And of course, immediately following on the heels of Helgi's death, we have the burning.
Yeah, which is, we have to talk about that.
Sure. I mean, we didn't include the burnings in Gisli Saga because there were just so many big scenes and beautiful scenes of bloodshed. But burnings are pretty serious things.
What is it with medieval Iceland and people constantly getting burned inside their houses?
Well, I think it's an effective way. You're trying to eradicate not just the person, but the family, and sort of remove their footprint from the landscape. And this is the most effective way to do it, I suppose.
It's pretty brutal way of doing it, though.
And I suppose it's also in sort of added brutality. Even if people survive, they're then homeless in the Icelandic winter.
Yeah.
Which is pretty rough.
Yeah.
And this burning, it's one of the bad ones because, when Blundkettel asks whether it's possible to negotiate or even to sort of let some of the people inside out.
Yeah.
Hen-Thorir, in the sort of, you know, cruel way that we expect from him, refuses to allow anyone to leave the house. And so
I just picture him kind of rocking on his heels, twiddling his fingers and smiling to himself.
Fiddling while Blundkettel burns.
Yeah.
But so we have, I mean, it's a burning, but it's an especially sort of brutal burning, right? No one is allowed out until the house collapses in on them and they all die.
Right. And typically, I mean, once we get to Njalssaga eventually, but in a lot of the burnings that you see, they let women and children out. Mm-hmm. But in this case, it's, let everyone burn.
Right.
Thanks a lot.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, Hen-Thorir.
And frustratingly, we don't know exactly who's in there, but we'll get to that when we get to body count.
Yeah. I'm going to throw in something that Blundkettel does. It's not a typical, but I think we've had a small tradition so far of throwing in some animal things in our best bloodshed, going back to Hrafnkel Saga. The slaughter of the 40 horses is just an interesting one. We don't see it happen. There's no great description of it, but it's worth noting just because of the number of horses that he's going to go ahead and slaughter so that he can feed his own men. This is again Blundkettel slaughtering 40 of his own horses so that he can feed the men who actually disregarded his warnings about how many animals to slaughter before the winter started.
Right, no, a remarkable generosity.
His own. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah,
so I'll throw that one in there.
Sure.
I don't think it's a great contender to win, but it's worth noting for best bloodshed.
Well, and if we count one horse being thrown off a cliff, 40 horses having their throats cut have to at least go in for consideration.
Well, these aren't magic horses, though.
It's true.
It's hardly as remarkable.
These aren't witch horses.
Freyfaxi.
And of course, because I know it will please you, I'm going to include Hen-Thorir's beheading, his posthumous beheading.
Yeah, if you didn't, I would have.
That the order of things is very specific. They're captured, then they're killed, then he's beheaded.
Yeah. Deservedly
well,
so.
But this is very clearly him just sort of sawing off the head of head off the corpse to carry away with him. He isn't sort of executed by beheading. He's slaughtered along with his men, and then at that point, Herstein gets down and starts sort of sawing away at his neck to take this thing away with him.
Does it say sawing? I just assumed that it was.
I'm just this is best bloodshed. I'm trying to give it a little bit of flavor.
Well, I'm just assuming that he had a sword handy. He just probably made one good swipe of it and then picked up the head.
There's no poetry in your soul.
Sorry. Yeah. How does one carry a head while you're riding a horse?
I imagine you just tie it on by the hair.
Well, I guess you could wrap it in a cloak or something like that, but yeah. What if it falls out? Do you ever just stop it?
Well, that's why you tie it on by the hair.
You're assuming he has very long hair. Although if you saw the Gisli Saga movie, all those guys had big bushy hair.
See?
So it's quite possible.
I think of Hen-Thorir as having sort of long, straggly, not very well washed hair.
Right, like a worm tongue or something.
Right.
So what's it going to be, John? We've got 4 candidates.
I mean, not the embarrassment of riches that we had in Gisli Saga, is there?
No, that's the thing. And, like I said, there's nothing really, there's no great descriptions of any of this kind of stuff going on. But my vote's going to go for the beheading of Hen-Thorir just because it's a fitting end for a horrible fellow.
You know what? I think I'm going to go with that, not because of the beheading itself, but because the beheading is utterly pointless. When he's
nice.
beheaded, I fully expect, because of course then Herstein immediately gets on his horse and rides to the All thing, and I was waiting for that moment when he sort of rolls the head out in the All thing to announce the death.
Yeah, it should be dramatic.
Or at least shows it to somebody, or ties it up on a pole or something. There's nothing. He just takes it as a souvenir. He just hates this guy so much that he wants to be able to, at any moment, sort of look at the severed head and remind himself, yeah, I got that guy. And that's just...
Well, you might be reading a little bit more into it.
There's sort of I just feel like there's a sort of otherwise untapped dark side to Herstein that he felt the need to take this guy's head with him at the end of it all.
Well, if I remember correctly, he gets a lot of credit, and his fame rises significantly as a result of the killing of Hen-Thorir and the foiling of the ambush.
So, if for no other reason, then that's a reason enough for it to win.
Sure, all right then. Beheading of Hen-Thorir wins Best Bloodshed.
Body count. So for body count this time, once again, we have an agreement on the number of dead.
Yeah,
and
there's some slight discussion.
Well, we had to talk
concerning
about a couple of things,
two individuals, but we were very, very close.
Well, and of course, we're partly helped by the fact that the body count in this saga is quite low.
Very low.
A grand total, I think we came up with, of 26 in the entire saga.
That's right.
And really, until you get to those final chapters, it's starting to look like there just isn't going to be much to go on at all.
Yeah, like we said, this is, for me, it was the first time reading this one. I thought, when is someone going to die? I'm sitting here waiting.
And we actually do have to wait. I mean, it's halfway through the saga before the first person dies.
When Helgi gets shot, that's the first one.
And then immediately following on that, we have a burning. And the burning...
But they don't, they don't tell us how many, and that's...
Right.
That's frustrating for me and you.
Right. I mean, which probably doesn't say anything good about us. But
we're just trying to do our job and count the number of bodies.
Right. We know that no one escaped that house, but at no point are we told the names of the people or even the number of the people who were inside.
No. Right. Although we should say it's significantly less than it would have been, because as soon as Blundkettel goes into the house, he's suspecting something's going to happen. And he tells as many of his men as are there that they can go home to their families' houses if they so desire, and I think a good number of them do.
Right, and it's worth noting that among the people he sent away, apparently, is his own son, because Herstein is actually off visiting his foster father that night. Mm-hmm. Now, we know Blundkettel dies, so he counts, and we know that he has a house guest, Orn the Norwegian, who's the one who fired that arrow, and he's in the house as well, and we know that because after the fire is over and after Tunguad has come and stolen the land, Orn's belongings, all of his possessions, are still in one of the outbuildings.
And he's nowhere around to claim
them.
Right,
and he's sort of, he's not there anymore to claim them. So Orn was still in the house when it burned. So we can count him.
You know what I wonder, if we didn't mention this in the summary, but when Orn first comes into Blundkettel's house, he is brought there with all of his all the other merchants, the traders that were on his boat. And then they're all distributed throughout other districts. Right. This is Orn's idea because they're all in trouble. He says, send them to other districts. And Blundkettel very generously sets it all up and for their own safety. Do they have no claim on that property or those goods at all?
Well, of course, one, they sort of are written out of the narrative at this point. So no.
They do kind of disappear. We never see them again.
But from a legal perspective, of course, they'd have to know that the belongings still existed. Right? The buildings were all burned. No one seems to know that the outbuilding holding Orn's stuff survived. Because you can actually you can trace, Orn's possessions for the rest of the saga. They sort of get passed around among that group of guys, and Gunnar Hlífarsson, I think, ends up with them eventually. And sort of stores them away.
Which is a good deal. Gunnar really put himself out, giving up his daughter and all that stuff. That's kind of his, the price he takes for all that.
But I mean, there's no reason to believe that the Norwegians even know that Orn's stuff survived. So, no.
Right. So really the sticking point for that body count is do we, how do we count how many people burned inside the house? We don't, but we can definitely count Blundkettel and Orn.
Right.
And so that adds 2 to the otherwise fairly clear body count.
Excellent. So 26. And of course, we did also decide at the very end of the saga, for those of you who have read it, Tunguad's sons, Thorvald and Thorod, both disappear in Norway. And the saga sort of ominously says that they will never return. It doesn't say why. At one point, we know Thorvald was captured and enslaved, but it's not clear what happens to either one of them after that. But we decided that does not count, since, enslaved is not dead, and there's no indication that they actually die. They just don't return.
No. Yeah, last we hear is they never will return, and Tunguad gets very sick after that.
Right.
Or very old. And
Right.
he shows his age. So yeah, we don't know what happens to them, so we're not going to count them. So 26 is the final count.
26 it is. Nicknames. This saga actually does have a handful of interesting nicknames.
But they almost come exclusively in that opening chapter with the lengthy genealogies.
Right, in that sort of, that rapid fire set of genealogies that we get right at the beginning of the saga. We get a handful of these guys. So I've got a short list here.
Okay.
And I'll just run them by you and see what you think. One, we've got Tunguad.
Sure.
Now when we get a name like Tongue-Odd, it's tempting to think that we're dealing with a guy known for a quick wit, or for being a troublemaker.
Or a very fat tongue.
Or a very fat tongue. Right. A guy who has a big problem speaking. Sadly, it's much less interesting than that. In this case.
Or is it?
I'm sorry, it is. Tongue is a place name. He's merely odd from Tongue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, I mean, if you're waiting for me to say something, I have nothing. That's it. He's odd from Tongue. That's it.
Now, our next one is Blundkettel. Now, he's interesting. Blundkettel inherits his nickname from his grandfather, who was also named Blundkettel. Kettle is their name, but the nickname there, Blund, is, it's a word that means something like, dozer or snoozer. Probably means sort of sleepyhead as a nickname.
Yeah. Dozer the Dozerian.
Yes, Dozer the Dozerian. It doesn't say anything good about you that you thought of that, or me that I thought of it when I wrote that down.
Did you really?
But yeah. But yeah, I think Sleepyhead is sort of the nickname that we're supposed to go with here.
That kind of makes me feel better that you are as stupid as I am.
Of course, we can't skip Hen-Thorir.
Yeah, we shouldn't skip him.
And his name means exactly what it sounds like. One of the early items that he carted around for sale was chickens.
Well, and let's put it exactly as the saga does. It says one time he was seen carrying a bunch of chickens.
Right.
And so they started calling him Hen-Thorir. I couldn't be more disappointed in the reveal of his nickname.
I actually really like it, and it's because, it's because of the way the name sticks. You have to assume it's meant unkindly.
Oh,
right?
definitely.
I mean, Hen-Thorir becomes a very wealthy man who sort of throws his weight around, and I think it's that nickname is a reminder of his humble origins as a peddler. Right? It's a sort of, it's a sort of, no matter how rich you become, you'll always be a chicken seller in my book. You Hen-Thorir.
Yeah, well, and at the very least, he's not Rooster Thor. He's Hen.
Right, no, exactly. Of course, that's a good point. We've got Thord the Bellower, or Thord Yeller. Now, we've seen this guy before. He was a figure in Eyrbyggja Saga. He's the one who made that all-important settlement offer to end the battle at Poop Rock.
You just like bringing up Poop Rock as much and any time you can.
I actually, I make a point. If I haven't heard anyone say Poop Rock all day, I sort of whisper it to myself as my head hits the pillow at night.
Poop Rock.
Poop Rock.
Yeah.
Now, his name...
isn't he also... Thord, just before you get into that, isn't Thord Bellower also the guy that devises the quarter court system in Iceland? Or do you don't know?
Yes, no, he is. Yes, no, I'm sorry, I'm thinking ahead to the fifth court. Which Njal
I
puts
trust
together.
you to kind of know some of these things.
No, Thord sets up the quarter courts. Now, his name, which is linked to this, it means yeller or shouter or bellower, but I believe, and I think most people read it as referring to the authority with which he speaks, rather than to the volume at which he speaks.
Right.
I mean, I suppose it can just mean he shouts a lot, but I think most people read it as meaning that his words carry a great deal of volume and weight. So, okay, right. So the next person we've got is Onund Broadbeard. There's no subtext here, and I don't really have anything to say about it. I just approve of a man with a good broad beard.
Yeah, it kind of comes up in almost every saga. There's someone with a beard.
Something
nickname.
Beard, yes.
And you always love him.
Absolutely. And then our last one is Thorkel Scarf.
Thorkel Scarf.
Whose name is Trefil. which is usually translated more as rags or tatters.
Right.
Although an older translation of the saga gave it as welt.
Welt.
And I found one source that wants to translate it slightly more flatteringly as silky. And it's not clear from the context of the saga whether the nickname refers to an item of clothing or not. I mean, certainly scarves are not an everyday accoutrement in the sagas, but
No.
but I guess people do occasionally wear them. But it may also refer to a description again of his facial hair, like Onan Broadbeard, that he's got this kind of ragged, tattery kind of beard.
All right, so we give an award for nicknames, don't we?
It's been a while, huh?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a while.
What are you thinking?
So who is it going to... I don't know. I mean, it seems obvious to choose Hen-Thorir on this one just because it's his saga and he's got that silly nickname. I like Thord Bellower as well, though. So I'm going to go with those two. I'll let you choose who you think it should be.
Oh, boy, that's a tough one.
Is it that tough, really, John? You just pick one and we move on.
It's really not. I mean, I'm resisting the idea of Hen-Thorir sweeping the awards, but I just can't resist. That's the most ridiculous nickname. It's so clearly meant as an insult, and it's a fun name. It's one of those sort of nicknames that make you want to get to know the guy, and then when you do, you're really sorry that you did.
Yeah, exactly. I was excited, like I said, to meet the fellow. And then sourly disappointed when I did.
Rack up another win for Hen-Thorir. Notable witticisms.
Hey, welcome to Notable Witticisms.
Wow.
So in Notable Witticisms, I think we've selected about 4 of these things. I'm going to start with the brilliant poem composed by the dead Helgi. Brenni, brenni, bloonkettel inni. Burn, burn, bloonkettel inside.
But of course, not actually composed by Helgi.
Oh no, no, composed by the scoundrel, by the scoundrel Hen-Thorir in order to get things going the way he wants them to go.
And also worth noting that this poem that he comes up with and sort of claims came from Helgi isn't actually very good. It's not really
Is that because it doesn't?
I mean, it's written as a verse in the saga, but it's not so much a verse as several words.
It's got some alliteration and assonance.
There
if
you go.
Like that
there you go.
Yeah, that's important. But I would give it up for maybe we want to include this one and vote for it because it's kind of brilliant on Hen-Thorir's part to come up with this so quickly. He sees Helgi fall, he immediately rushes over to the dead body, leans in, and comes up with a poem while he's leaning down there.
Well, that's not much of one.
Well, but still, in the moment, it's kind of clever.
There once was a man from Reykjavik. Okay, so my first nominee is going to be the Herstein's understated response to Tungu Odd stealing his father's land in the aftermath of the burning. If you remember, Herstein and his foster father Thorbjorn ask for Tungu Odd's help to sort of figure out what happened and to figure out who to blame. Tungu Odd agrees to come with them, but when they arrive at the still smoldering ruins of Blundkettle's farm, Tungu Odd grabs a burning brand, rides around the farmstead, and claims all the land on the grounds that there's no one living there anymore. And then immediately rides away, leaving Herstein and Thorbjorn standing.
Poor Herstein can probably smell his family burning still.
And Herstein just sort of looks at his foster father and says, so what do we do now? This didn't turn out very well.
This didn't turn out very well. Yeah, it's great.
It's sort of a great, it's a very kind of understated moment. I like that.
It's very funny. It's probably not supposed to be very funny though, but it's hilarious to me. This didn't turn out very well. What else?
Well, okay, so I've got another one. If you like that one,
if you like, stick with me.
Another one of these sort of understated comments. These are always the ones that kind of catch my eye. This is when Thorbjorn and Herstein approach Thorkel Scarf to try to get his help, and they do this by sort of arriving with all of the livestock that they've salvaged from Blundkettle's farm. And Thorkel Scarf comes out and says, well, clearly there's been a problem. Please, put your livestock out to pasture in my fields. Store all your belongings here in my home. Consider yourselves
anything I could do.
Consider yourself my guests. Right. Anything I can do to help.
He's probably rubbing his hands together because he's a real opportunity for some income.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
and honor, obviously, because you're helping them out.
And sort of building up your own reputation for a generous man and so forth. And then when he learns that what's happened is that Blundkettel was burned, and burned by a consortium of some relatively powerful men, Thorkel's reply is, well, I don't think I would have offered my assistance so quickly if I'd known that before.
Yeah. Which is something that's echoed later by whatever his name is, Thord Bellower.
Mm-hmm. Well, Gunnar actually does that as well.
Yeah, everyone does.
Yeah. Oh no, nobody wants any part of this.
Yeah, pretty much the whole second half is people going to other people's farms, withholding information so that they get a promise from somebody, and then they say, "Oh, by the way, now you're bound to help me,
sucker,
in this horrible case." Very clever. The next one that I'm gonna add is from Thorkel. Thorkel learned that trick right away, and he's very clever. But anyway, he goes over to Gunnar Hlífarsson's house, and they get there late at night. And it's a farmhand that answers the door. And the farmhand makes it very clear that Gunnar is not in the habit of getting up late at night and answering the door, especially when it's cold out.
Just understand.
And so he says, either you come in and make yourselves at home, take a bed and go to sleep, and you can talk to Gunnar in the morning, or you can go on your merry way.
Which is fairly saucy.
It is a little bit saucy, but it's late at night and it's cold and they don't want to deal with this. So Thorkel doesn't take kindly to this response, and he really, really wants to talk to Gunnar. And as we know, he wants to get him outside. He says to the farmhand, "You do one of two things. Either go and do it properly as you're told, or I'll bounce the hilt of my sword off your nose." This is fantastic. But anyway, the farmhand goes in and wakes up Gunnar and says, "There's a very ornery man outside, and I don't want to talk to him anymore." That's how they get Gunnar outside. So I like that one. In fact, I think I'm going to vote for that one as my favorite, because it's as far as being witty, that's the most witty thing that's out there. The other ones are funny they're
contextually funny, but
yeah. But in terms of just a funny line, a witty line, well placed, I think Thorkel gets it for me.
Yep, I agree. Bouncing a sword pommel off your nose takes it.
Oh, glory. This is the moment that I've been waiting for since I finished reading this saga, John. You know who I'm voting for.
Keep us in suspense, why don't you?
Well, it's funny you should ask. I'm going to suggest that we outlaw Hen-Thorir. Of
course you are.
There's no question. Thorir, he's an awful person. Outlawry. It's all his. Let's go on. Let's move on to
Too good for him. Well, we can't move on just yet. I mean, for one thing, there are several other men to consider in this saga who deserve a hearing.
Should I list Hen-Thorir's crimes before you dismiss him?
Well,
I'll remind you that he is
guilty of plenty.
He is a moneylender, John. Ooh. And then he forces his way into family relationships by bribing people. Although I don't know that any of them actually ever collects their half of his wealth that he promises.
Right. He hands out half his wealth quite frequently.
Yeah, he does. He gets Helgi that way, and then he gets Thorvald that way. It's strange. And I don't think any of them ever see a penny. And then he burns Blundkettel and kind of mocks him as it's happening.
On spurious grounds, right? I mean, sort of on the grounds that Helgi demanded it with his dying breath, which of course we know is not true.
Yeah, he's a liar. And then he establishes a sick cow ambush.
You want to outlaw him for having an incompetent ambush plan?
Yeah, I just can't tolerate that kind of thing.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, yeah, you know what? Thorir. He's a despicable, terrible person. And I didn't even mention the hay thing.
Well, I grant you that it's a strong case. But for completeness sake, I feel I have to try. What about Arngrim the Gothi?
No, I don't see the point.
He participates in the burning.
He does, but he's kind of forced to by Hen-Thorir. He allies himself
with Hen-Thorir right from the beginning. He is, remember, outlawed in the saga for his actions. Unlike
he's outlawed for actions, but that's really more an issue of the kind of the competition of that region and chieftains trying to outdo other chieftains so that they can.
No, he set fire to somebody's farm.
Yeah, I guess you're right. He did do that.
He is a convicted burner. This is not just a political game. He killed a bunch of guys.
Yeah. But who told him or set the burning up? That's what I want.
Fair enough. So there's that.
Well, let me introduce a more reasonable person who actually did do some. Well, I shouldn't say Arngrim didn't do anything. He did, but let me throw in someone who kind of started things in a similar way to Thorir. Orn the Norwegian.
Really?
Yeah. Who shot Helgi? Who set this whole thing in motion?
Okay, here's the problem.
Orn.
I understand
You know
what
I'm
you're
not going
saying.
to vote for him. I'm just throwing him out.
I understand what you're saying. But how often have we seen someone in the moment of being provoked by the enemy sort of throwing a spear or firing an arrow into the group of people and, somebody gets hit? Usually it's some nameless guy or some farmhand or some visiting person from overseas. Actually, it's usually the Norwegian who gets shot.
Yes, it is.
And we never care, right? Nobody ever looks at that and goes like, oh, what a horrible thing.
Well, I'm sure their families care,
his
John.
arrow happens to hit Helgi Arngrimsson, who, as you said earlier, is sort of a decent fellow among all of these jerks. And so we immediately think, oh, what a terrible thing Orn did. But I think, most of the time we wouldn't blink at the sort of behavior in a saga.
So you're really trying to argue that shooting an arrow into a crowd of people is okay behavior?
Well, I'm arguing that it wouldn't stand out. It's the kind of thing that just happens once in a while. If you're standing around in a crowd of people in Iceland, chances are somebody's going to fire an arrow at you eventually.
Well, that's not a very good advertisement for traveling to Iceland, is it?
Well, medieval Iceland. It would be hard to travel there anyway.
That's true.
No, modern Iceland. I've been to Iceland. It's delightful, and you hardly ever get shot at.
As far as you know.
This message paid for by the Icelandic Tourism Board. Come to Iceland. You hardly ever get shot with an arrow.
All right, so you're saying no Orn because he just casually fired into a crowd of people.
Right. I mean, if you're going to go for people who are sort of, tangentially related to what's going on, I think you make a much stronger case for someone like Tungu Odd.
Really?
Yeah, it was kind of the power behind all the chaos that goes on. Right.
Well, but he doesn't get outlawed. He doesn't suffer at all for what happens.
Well, of course not, because he's a very powerful man. That doesn't mean we are no respecter of persons here at Saga Thing. We can outlaw anybody we want. And I think if you look at Tungu Odd's behavior throughout, you think about his arrogance in trying to set prices for imported goods. You think about
that's tradition. We see that in other sagas. You're making arguments about.
You think about his putting together 400 men and attacking Thord Bellower's men at the river on their way to Thingnes.
Again, we see that all the time. That's exactly what a chieftain does when they're trying to defend their people.
I think we can certainly say we see it other times, but I think we also say that people generally look down on that sort of behavior.
You know what? I would argue that if you look at your list of Thingmen, Aud excluded, some of them may be guilty for doing exactly what you're trying to outlaw Tungu.
Actually, no, I've been going for character, guys. Your crew, on the other hand,
wait, you
the
have
murderer's
Snorri
row
Gothi.
that you've got over there.
You've got Snorri Gothi,
yes,
who is
I
notorious
do. I just wanted to hear you say it again.
Exactly this kind of thing. He is the king of, let's not get into the actual thing, let's fight outside of the thing.
Yes.
So, I don't think we outlaw Tungu.
All right. I'm going to say that we go ahead and outlaw Hen-Thorir.
Yeah, let's do that, because you can't stand the guy.
For the second time in 3 episodes, we're going to have to outlaw the name of the saga. Outlaw the eponymous figure.
Yeah, that's very weird. I really would not have expected that.
Well, Hen-Thorir, don't let the door hit you in the headless body on the way out.
Thingman.
All right, so it's time for us to choose our new Thingman to join our cruise. We flipped a coin, and I won the coin toss. And so I get to go first. And it's actually a really good saga for picking Thingmen out of.
It is. There's some good characters here.
Well, and there are so many significant figures, important figures who show up in saga after saga. Really powerful men from this kind of middle range of the Commonwealth period.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for big men who have a lot of power, a lot of wealth, a great reputation, there's somebody here for everyone.
You've got Blundkettel, whose family is a very powerful family. Not just him, but sort of the reputation of his family over generations.
Yeah. John, does Blundkettel show up in other sagas?
Oh, yeah.
He's not a
several.
name I'm familiar with.
Yes, he appears in several other sagas.
I wonder if he's always as noble and wonderful as he is in this saga elsewhere.
He's often just sort of in the background. So you don't really learn.
Yeah, I would imagine.
I feel like I learned more about him in this saga than I knew before.
Sure.
You've got Tungu Odd. Perhaps, a bit of a Snorri character, A little bit manipulative, a little bit sneaky, but undeniably very powerful, very influential. Another guy who shows up over and over again.
Yeah, we see him the biggest sagas he's in is Ale Saga and Laxdal Saga. And there he's, again, a power broker. He's one of these big guys that comes in to help out characters in the All Thing or with his military might and things like that.
And if you're looking for power brokers, Thord Bellower is, as big as they come. You think about Eyrbyggja Saga. This is the guy they call in when an entire region is in armed conflict and cannot reconcile itself. And he's sort of called in, and his authority is such that he sort of asserts, okay, the mountain is no longer holy for assembly purposes, and everyone just accepts that.
Right.
That there's a man who carries some weight. And then you've also got a couple of guys who are just sort of noble figures who are more specific to this saga. Thorkel Scarf, Herstein Blundkettelsson, even Gunnar Hlífarsson. Right. You got some decent guys in this saga. Not famous figures, but just good, wholesome, salt of the earth.
Even Thorbjorn, who's we didn't include him in the nicknames, but his nickname is Strider, which I thought
That's true. Yeah.
Fascinating. Thorbjorn Strider is also a really nice guy and very smart. He's able to set up Thorkel Scarf brilliantly, and apparently he can disappear.
Right. Yeah. There's that whole sort of odd moment when he vanishes at the burned farm. And
supposedly, according to Theodore M. Anderson, he vanishes.
Right.
I didn't catch that.
I've always just read it as he wandered off and he sort of comes back with the livestock. I never really read it as that he performs a vanishing act, but apparently that's how Anderson.
The saga says he disappears,
right.
But again, we just thought he went into the building or kind of.
Right. He's sort of hiding behind
some
a cow.
brush. So yeah, you want a magical guy like that.
Yeah, so I've got 6 or 7 different names to choose from here. I think what I want in a thing man at this point, I want somebody who can bring people together. I want somebody who can build alliances, build connections, build kin groups.
You're picking the guy I want.
I think I have to reach out to a man whose voice bounces off the countryside, a man who bellows like a bull. I want Thord Yeller in my camp.
See, I was convinced you were going to pick Tungu Odd. Because he's a little bit more powerful and more modern than a Thord Bellower.
He is, but he's the poor man's Snorri, and I've already got the rich man's Snorri. So,
well, then I'm going to have to dismiss him as an old man who's not really worth his salt. Damn, got me there. I was all ready to pick him. Well, I guess for me, I have to then choose between two people. I've got to choose between Tungu Odd for his power and his reputation. And his fame. I mean, he's really one of these guys who everyone knows his name. Right. Blundkettel is my other character.
Okay.
And, I leave this saga really liking Blundkettel. Of course, I'm supposed to. It's written that way.
Right. He's the sort of tragic figure, right?
But it's not really just that he's a tragic figure. It's his behavior. He represents all that is good and wholesome in mankind. That strikes a chord with me. So the question is, do I want... Why? Let's not get into my deep, dark secrets. But, I really admire a character like him who's willing to sacrifice everything he has, or at least 40 of what he has for his men. But, he tries very hard throughout the saga when he's alive anyway, to provide for people and to use his foresight to make sure everyone's happy. Blundkettel's a great, great choice, but Tungu Odd, he's got name recognition, power. He's basically got everything that Thord Bellower has. And if I want to keep even with you, it seems like he's the one to take. Especially because you can get him at a later date, and I don't want that to happen. So,
that's true. He's going to show up again.
Tungu Odd, welcome to the fold. I'll just hope Blundkettel shows up in a crappy saga, and I'll pick him then. So I'm taking Tungu Odd.
Interesting choice. That shows a desire to win rather than a desire to make good moral decisions.
This is the Icelandic saga.
Fair enough.
Right? So,
all right.
When in Iceland.
So Thord Bellower for me, Tungu Odd for you. Excellent. Good choices all around, I think. Final rating.
All right. Now, we noted at the beginning of this podcast that this was a short saga. Like Hrafnkel, it manages to accomplish a whole lot in a small space. And I find myself wavering back and forth to which one do I like better, which I didn't expect to have happen. It's really tightly structured. And it's a cleverly told story. In fact, I think it's more clever and engaging in some ways than Hrafnkel's saga is.
Ooh, those big words.
Those are big words, but here's why I think so. One of the greatest successes of the saga is its ability to make me feel something genuine for its characters. Mm-hmm. Whether it's the bile-provoking Hen-Thorir, or the inspiring and admirable Blunkedal, who I just dismissed from my Thingman group. I mean, whatever you look at it, however you look at it, that's saying a lot. And I don't know that I ever felt that connected to any of the characters in Hrafnkel's saga in the way that I do for those in Hen-Thorir's saga. I'm also a big fan of the second half of the saga, and that's where we find the links in a chain of allegiance being forged in large part through cleverness and trickery. The whole thing's really well written and brilliantly plotted out. Now, it's not all sunshine and roses. I'm going to dock it some points for a couple of reasons. As much as I enjoy the second half, I find myself frustrated by the quick pace of the thing after Herstein's alliance of the chieftains is formed. We rush through that developing conflict so quickly, we never really get a sense of it and appreciation for what's happening. We get next to nothing from the battle scenes, and even when Hen-Thorir is beheaded, it's presented almost as an afterthought. Mm-hmm. It's just too rushed to be an effective conclusion to an otherwise great story. But the saga has a lot going for it, and I won't soon forget this saga. I won't soon forget these characters and the story, and that's really saying something, because some of these sagas can blend together. Sure. I'm going to score it a little higher than I thought I would. I'm giving it a little bit better score than Hrafnkel. I'm going with Hen-Thorir's saga at 7.
7. All right. Fair enough.
Much higher than I thought I would.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised to hear that. I mean, I kind of had a similar reaction. I came into this expecting it to be kind of, mediocre score. And there's no question but that this saga has a lot going for it, a lot more than I had remembered from previous readings. There's a fair amount of intrigue among the central characters. There's an entertainingly conniving villain. I mean, he's scum, but he's entertaining scum. Hen-Thorir is a guy you love to hate.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
There are several instances of really clever writing. I like that. On the other hand, it's hard to find a truly sympathetic figure in the story. I mean, unless we count Blunkedal or his son Herstein, and I don't think I do. It's not that I don't find them sympathetic, it's that I don't find myself, in the end, deeply caring about them. So like a number of other sagas, this story focuses on the selfish machinations of the powerful as a destructive force in the Commonwealth. I enjoy those stories, but the best ones give me a clear stake in the outcome of events. And so I enjoy the saga, but there's a lack of depth even to the sympathetic figures. I don't feel like I know Blunkedal the way I know, say, a Gisli, or even a Snorri. And
although those are rare characters that are so well defined.
Fair enough. And the legal issues, the hay laws and things like that, although I always find them interesting, in some ways they only muddy the waters further as far as the sort of the motivations of the characters. So I'm happy that the saga is as good as it is, and I want to recommend it to people. But there's this bit of me that's saying, but it's Norwegian propaganda in favor of hay laws, and you can't rate that too highly.
Really? That's... Why is that? It's well written,
well written propaganda.
Yeah.
So I'm actually coming in very close to you. I'm gonna give it a 6.5, which is actually, again, it's half a point higher than I gave Hrafnkel. And I'll probably feel like this was a little bit generous tomorrow, or by the time it goes up on the website. But I'll stick to it. 6.5.
Great. So, for one of the shorter sagas, this is a pretty high scoring saga.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Right. And deservedly so. I think this is one of those hidden gems that people really should read more than they do.
I think so too. All right. Well, that wraps it up for us. Next time we're going to be taking on, we have a special episode coming up.
That's right. We do. We're going to hopefully, in the next few weeks, put together an episode in which we'll step aside from the usual saga thing, mode, and we'll look at some materials connected to the historical figure of Ragnar Lothbrok.
All of this, of course, being in honor of the return of the television show Vikings on History Channel. So we look forward to doing that.
Right. So we're going to look at the materials connected to his name, talk a little bit about the sort of that smudged line between history and fiction that you find in the sagas, and maybe talk a little bit about the show itself. which I know Andy has sort of been champing at the bit to talk about, and which I have to admit, I recently received from Amazon and haven't had a chance to watch yet.
Well, then you have
so
some
I'll
work
be
to do.
watching it before our next episode, and then we can talk a little bit about it.
In the meantime, check out our website, sagathingpodcast.wordpress.com, where you can participate in polls, read some history, find some videos, and download old episodes. Also, follow us on Twitter at SagaThingPod and on Facebook at SagaThingPodcast. We'll see you next time with Sagas of Ragnar Lothbrok.
Bye for now.
Yeah. Again, I don't know what you want me to say about that, but yes.
I just want you to seem interested.
I
hate it when you're so cold and silent.